Welcome back everyone, it is Mike from ManaHoarders. In this video we are bringing you a commander deck tech for a Dimir commander, Umbris, Fear Manifest. You can cast this commander for 3, a blue and a black. You get a legendary 1/1 Nightmare Horror. Umbris Fear Manifest gets +1/+1 for each card your opponents own in exile. Also, whenever Umbris or another Nightmare or Horror enters the battlefield under your control, target opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a land card. Before we dive into the deck, let's go over a few key points. First up, the final price for this build came out to $107.52. This does include the price of our commander and all of our lands. Now do bear in mind, some of these prices will vary greatly depending on the quality of the cards you purchase, the vendor you use, and a variety of other factors. Our strategy is fairly straightforward. We are running plenty of nightmares and horror creatures to synergize with our commander's second ability. And to top that off, we are running plenty of cards that can exile our creatures and return them to the battlefield to generate more value from the enter the battlefield ability. So once it is all said and done, our opponents will have measly libraries with no cards to protect themselves from our giant commander that can swing in for the kill. Now let's go ahead and dive into the deck. First up are our artifacts. Arcane Signet can tap for 1 mana of our commander's color identity. Charcoal Diamond taps for a black mana. Commander Sphere, we can tap it to add 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. We can also sacrifice it to draw a card. Conjurer's Closet, at the beginning of our end step we can exile a target creature we control, then return that card to the battlefield under our control. Mask of Riddles, the equipped creature has fear, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we can draw a card. Mind Stone taps for a colorless, we can also sacrifice it to draw a card. Panharmonicon pretty much doubles up any of our enter the battlefield triggers. Sky Diamond taps for a blue mana, and Soul Ring can tap for 2 colorless mana. Moving on to our creatures, we do have some legends helping out our commander. Falthis Shadowcat Familiar. Commander creatures we control have Menace and Death Touch. Grazilax Ithlid Scholar. Whenever a creature we control becomes blocked, we may return it to its owner's hand. And whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, we can draw a card. And Orvar the Allform. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents we control, we create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. So whenever we are targeting our creatures with instants or sorceries, we will be creating tokens that are copies of them. Now those tokens will technically be entering the battlefield, so they will trigger our commander's ability. And for our not so legendary creatures, Advanced Stitchwing, we can pay 2 and a blue, discard 2 cards, and return it from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Banehound is a 1/1 with lifelink and haste. Biblioplex Assistant. It is not one of the creatures that we need for our tribal ability, but whenever it enters the battlefield we can put up to 1 target instant or sorcery from our graveyard on top of our library, so it does give us some recursion for our spells. Changeling Outcast is all creature types and it can't block or be blocked. Consuming Aberration. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in our opponent's graveyards, and whenever we cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she hits a land, then puts those cards into his or her graveyard. Deadeye Navigator, again, not one of our tribal synergies, but as long as it's soulbound with another creature, we can pay 1 and a blue, exile the creature, and then return it to the battlefield. So again, more ETB triggers. Devourer of Memory, whenever one or more cards are put into our graveyard from our library, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn and can't be blocked. But we can also pay 1, a blue and a black, and put the top card of our library into our graveyard. Dread Presence, whenever we play a swamp we can choose one of the following: draw a card and lose a life, or deal 2 damage to any target and gain 2 life. Faceless Butcher, whenever it enters we can exile another creature other than Faceless Butcher, but whenever it leaves we return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Foul Watcher has Flying, whenever it enters we can surveil 1, and it gets +1/+0 as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in our graveyard. Fume Spitter, we can sacrifice it and put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. Mesmeric Fiend, whenever it enters, target opponent reveals his or her hand, and we choose a non-land card from it and exile that card, but whenever the Fiend leaves the battlefield, we can return that card to its owner's hand. Mind Flayer, whenever it enters the battlefield, we gain control of target creature for as long as we control Mind Flayer. Misshapen Fiend is a simple 1/1 with flying. Nemesis of Reason, whenever it attacks, a defending player puts the top 10 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Plague Mare can't be blocked by white creatures, and whenever it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn. Sludge Monster, whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, we can put a slime counter on up to 1 other target creature, and non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 2/2. Dwarf Infiltrator has Skulk. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we can draw a card, and if we do, we will discard a card. And whenever we discard a creature card, we can pay 2. If we do, we get a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature token onto the battlefield. Yarok's Fenlurker. Whenever it enters the battlefield, each opponent exiles a card from their hand. And Zagoth Mamba, we included it because it does fit the tribal synergy and is a simple 1/1 for 1 black mana. Next up are our enchantments. Aqueous Form, the enchanted creature can't be blocked, and whenever it attacks, we can scry 1. Curator's Ward, the enchanted permanent has hexproof, and whenever the enchanted permanent leaves the battlefield, if it was historic, we can draw 2 cards. Kaya's Ghost Form, we can enchant a creature or planeswalker we control. Whenever the enchanted permanent dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control. Propaganda, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking. Reflections of Litjara, whenever it enters we can choose a creature type, and whenever we cast a spell of the chosen type, we copy the spell. And Sleeper's Robe, the enchanted creature has fear, and whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, we may draw a card. For our instance, Aetherize can return all attacking creatures to their owner's hands. Aphotic Wisps, target creature becomes black and gains fear until end of turn, and we can draw a card. Dark Ritual gives us 3 black mana. Dive Down, target creature we control gets +0/+3 and gains hexproof until end of turn. Essence Flux allows us to blink one of our creatures. Ghostly Flicker, we can exile 2 artifacts, creatures, and or lands we control, return those to the battlefield under our control. Leap, target creature gains flying until end of turn, and we can draw a card. Museum Skin, target creature we control gets +0/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn, but we can also overload it for 1 in a blue. Negate can counter target non-creature spell. Opt, we can scry 1 and draw 1. Rewind, we can counter target spell, and untap up to 4 lands. Siren's Ruse, we can blink one of our creatures, but if it's a pirate, we can draw a card. Slip Through Space, target creature can't be blocked this turn, and we can draw a card. Teferi's Time Twist, again allows us to blink a permanent we control. Unwind can counter target non-creature spell and untap up to 3 lands. Moving on to our sorceries, Call of the Nightwing creates a 1/1 blue and black horror creature token with flying, but it also has Cipher. Distant Melody, we choose a creature type, then draw a card for each permanent we control of that type. Maddening Cacophony, each opponent mills 8 cards, but if we kicked it, instead each opponent mills half their library rounded up. Open into Wonder, X target creatures we control can't be blocked this turn, and whenever they deal combat damage to a player, we can draw a card. Preordain allows us to scry 2 and then draw a card. Read the Bones, we can scry 2, draw 2, and lose 2 life. Sign in Blood, target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. Sleep, tap all creatures target player controls. Those creatures don't untap during that player's next untap step. Tasha's Hideous Laughter, each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until that player has exiled cards with total mana value 20 or more. Voidwalk, we can exile target creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, and we can also cipher this card. And Whispering Madness, each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards the player discarded this way. This also has cipher as well. And last but not least is our mana base. We are keeping things very basic with 17 basic swamps and 18 basic islands. And just like that, we've reached the end of this Commander deck tech for Umbris Fear Manifest. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, tell your friends about us, and leave a comment down below. Let us know what commanders you would like to see us build around in the future. We really appreciate all of your support.